Hi everyone, me again. Now that we're done with the upper limb, we're going to focus on the lower limb, starting with the pelvic girdle. Each lower limb is going to be made up of 31 bones, which form two distinct regions, which are the pelvic girdle and the free lower limb. The pelvic girdle is formed by one bone instead of two, like the pectoral girdle. And this bone is what we call the hip bone, which can also be called the coxal bone, the pelvic bone, or even the ox coxa. And the free lower limb will be formed by one femur, right over here. It's going to be formed by a tibia, a fibula, 7 tarsals, which are your ankle bones, 5 metatarsals, and 14 phalanges. So the difference here between the upper limb and the lower limb, like I said, is that the hip bone is formed by only one bone, which we will see later that's actually made up of 3 fused bones. The femur is homologous to the humerus. The tibia will be homologous to the ulna because it's medial. The fibula will be homologous to the radius because it's lateral. Now, instead of carpals, we have tarsals. And the way that I remember tarsals instead of carpals is that it starts with a T for toes. And then we'll have the same number of metatarsals as metacarpals and the same number of phalanges on the toes as we had in the digits. So some things are very similar. So that's why it's important that you understand what we talked about in the upper limb, and it will make it easier for you to understand the lower limb as well. The lower limb can be divided into 3 regions that's going to be connected at 3 different joints. The joints are going to be the hip joint, the knee joint, and the ankle joint. And so what's going to unite the pelvic girdle to the thigh or the femur is going to be the hip joint. What will unite the thigh to the leg is going to be the knee joint. And what will unite the leg to the foot is going to be the ankle joint. Now the same thing with the arm, where the arm was just the upper part or the humerus. Here the leg is just this portion over here. So from now on, when we talk about the leg, we're referring just to the bottom portion of the lower limb and not the whole lower limb. Here we have an image of the pelvic girdle, which, like I said, is made up of the hip bone, which can also be called the ox coxa or the coxal bone. And the hip bones, they will unite anteriorly at this joint, which is called the pubic symphysis. Of course, when we talk more about joints, then we will talk about the pubic symphysis again. And they will unite posteriorly with the axial skeleton at this sacroiliac joint, which makes sense, right? Because this is the sacrum, and this part of the pelvic girdle is formed by the ilium. And therefore, we form the sacroiliac joint between the 2 bones. Now, this complete ring formed by the sacrum, the coccyx, which is down here, the pelvic girdles on both sides, forms what we call a bony pelvis, in which functionally this bony pelvis, it will provide a strong and stable support for the vertebral column and the pelvic and lower abdominal organs. And each pelvic girdle of the bony pelvis will also connect the bones of the free lower limbs to the axial skeleton, and therefore it will transfer all these forces from the lower limb to move the entire mass of the body during locomotion. As I said previously, the pelvic girdle is formed by 3 bones. The top bone is what we call the ilium, which is here in yellow. Then this anterior bone is what we call the pubis, which on both sides they will come together at the pubic symphysis anteriorly. And then the posterior bone is what we call the ischium, right over here. Again, we can highlight right over here the sacroiliac joint. and how the pelvic girdle will articulate with the femur right over here, more specifically the head of the femur. But we will talk about this later on. First, let's talk about the ilium. I did draw these blue lines over here that's going to divide the three bones that form the coxal bone. This top bone over here is going to be the ilium. This posterior bone over here is going to be the ischium, and the one in the middle, so the medial bone, will be the pubis, and it's located also anteriorly. All these three bones, they will come together in this one bone feature over here that's called the acetabulum, which is a big depression where the head of the femur will articulate right inside of this socket over here. With regards to just the ilium, the top part over here is what we call the iliac crest. If you look at the bone in an interior view, you're going to be able to see this depression over here that's called the iliac fossa, and you can see it over here as well. Then you're going to have this big indentation over here that's going to be called the greater sciatic notch, and you can see it here as well. And that's where part of the sciatic nerve, which is a big nerve, will pass through. And you can see it over here on this image as well, the greater sciatic notch. If you have a greater, you will have a lesser, but that's on the ischium right over here, and we will cover it on the next slide. But for the ilium, this is all that you need to know. The pubis is going to be the bone that's located more anteriorly, right over here. As you can see right down the middle, it will separate this hole, which is called the obturator foramen. So the obturator foramen is a bone feature of the coxal bone that will be shared by the pubis and by the ischium. And there will be a nerve that's called the obturator nerve that will pass through the obturator foramen. Again, the acetabulum will be formed by part of the pubis, part of the ilium, and part of the ischium. And the other bone feature that you need to know about the pubis is the pubic symphysis, which is located anteriorly, and that's where you're going to have a cartilage that will unite the two coxal bones. And lastly, we have the ischium. The ischium is located more posteriorly, which is this part right over here. Again, it will share the obturator foramen with the pubis. It will contain the lesser sciatic notch right over here. It will also have a little bump that sticks out, which is called the ischiospine. And you can see it on this image, on this image over here. You can see it on this image as well. So this would be your greater sciatic notch. This would be your ischiospine, and right below the ischiospine, you're going to have the lesser sciatic notch right over there. And the last bone feature that you need to know is the ischiotuberosity, which is a rough part of the bone, which is the part where you sit on. So you're actually, if you're listening to this sitting down, you're sitting on your ischiotuberosity.